Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. It is a beautiful spring day here in Georgia, and I'm continuing to work on the 68 Mustang Fastback known as Fangled. I believe this is video number 22. I may be wrong, I'll have to check that. But regardless, there's at least 20 other videos before this one. If you haven't seen any of those, I suggest you go back and look. What I'm trying to do is build a 68 Mustang Fastback basically from dynacorn parts and build it with a Coyote engine in it out of a 2017 F-150. So that's a Generation 2 Coyote engine. Now there's a lot going on. The engine itself is very wide, takes up a lot of room, and in these cars, which are literally a lot smaller than any late model Mustang made, the size comparison is quite different. We're trying to put a late model engine, let's say, into an old or original design. So you have to allow for certain things. And as I always tell people, test fit, test fit, test fit. You want to make sure everything is going to fit before you're at the final phase of your build. So if you do all kinds of work and you paint and get it all done, and then you start putting things together and you realize, oh, I forgot about this or that, now you're backtracking and you could cause more problems that you don't want to deal with. So in the last video I talked about the master cylinder, the vintage air system, the brake pedal, and how things are coming together. And I have more to talk about with that, but I also have some other cool parts that I want to show you that are going to help with this process. So let's get started. Just so you know, I have the front door of the shop open, and you may hear birds chirping, you may hear people outside doing things, and that's okay because spring is on the way. Now, I talked about this master cylinder before, and it fits. Like, it'll go into this area where the master cylinder needs to go. And I've had people talk about this. They've offered, various suggestions. The problem we run into is the original, or what came with the TCI kit, was a very long master cylinder. It was like over 8 inches long. And this one is much shorter, about 6.5, and it will fit into the area that it's intended. However, it's very close to the valve cover. So what I'm going to consider doing with that is relieving the firewall, cutting things loose, maybe moving it back about 1/2 of an inch or so. And also the bracket will need to be modified. So I can compress it, I can cut off the flanges that are up against the firewall, remove 1/2 an inch, bring it back a little bit, and we'll adjust from there. I want to make sure that the plunger on the master cylinder itself and the arm that's on the assembly have enough room to make those adjustments. So that's something I just have to look at and try to make use of. But I think it's going to be fine, but I will play with that as well. Also, the vintage air system is in the car, or sitting in the car, and in the previous video I talked about the issue with these lines coming out right here. Now what I think I need to do is I'm more concerned with this heater hose line than anything, and I want to bring it out to where it's basically kind of right about here. And if I do that, it'll run next to the valve cover and shouldn't have any issue at all. The other two lines I can deal with the elbows that I showed with the hoses, and that'll take care of that problem. So what I'm going to probably end up doing, I can do the math here. I'll make sure these lines, because they move a little bit, they're not completely tightened down, but essentially I want to move it out about 1.5 inches, something like that, and I think that'll be enough. And then I'll probably cut this piece loose out of the firewall and just move it over 1.5 inches, and that'll move the interior assembly over 1.5 inches, and that should take care of that. On to other things. I've talked about the plenum, the air intake that's on this, and how we're not going to use that. And we're going to be putting in a Holley system, so all of that plenum is going to go away. Along with that, I want to use this plate that I talked about. This is made by a company called Massive, and this is going to be used to lift the engine out. I don't like using the chain, as I mentioned previously. Another thing I want to talk about, this front section. So we have the original setup with, here's the water pump, here's your crankshaft pulley, here's an idler tensioner, over here's the alternator, AC compressor. I guess that's an idler as well, just a roller. Another tensioner here. So there's a lot going on with all of this stuff, and I will say this is going to be removed. I don't need this AC compressor. So all of these lines that are now hovering around the front of this are going to go away. Don't need them, don't want them. The wiring, I feel like, my understanding is the Holley system is going to take care of all of this wiring, so I can probably remove all of that as I remove the plenum. What we have is a Vintage Air front runner system. So you've got a series of really nice brackets here, billet pieces. There's some fittings, threaded fittings there that go on the compressor, the new compressor. Got another roller here, other pieces and parts that all interact together. And this is the new AC compressor. Nice small unit. This is where that fitting will bolt on. Over here I have a pulley on the base here that is going to go on the power steering pump. So that's a press-on pulley. This goes on the front of the clutch for the AC compressor. Another serpentine belt. They also have given us a couple more switches, or a switch and 2 more elbows. And then in this box, if you look at this, aluminum power steering pump without reservoir with stock fitting. So what's in here is from Detroit. I guess it's Detroit Speed is who makes this. I don't see it on that, but it says Detroit on the top here. And this is the new power steering pump. So I'm not sure how that's going to work with the. It says no reservoir. That's what I'm reading here anyway. So that may come into play moving forward. And there's also a drawing here that shows the power steering pump and the AC compressor, and then relocation of this tensioner. So that's all going to be part of this process. The other things I want to talk about, and somebody else had mentioned this as well, is the fact I don't have the hinges on the car, and I have the original hinges for this car. And what I'll end up doing is bolting them on, take the springs off, and collapse them down to look at the space that they need to take up. So another consideration, it shouldn't go any lower than this line right here. And I don't think that'll interfere at all with this, but I need to look at it for this side because the master cylinder has the proportioning valve mounted on the outside or the driver's side. So I have to make sure there's enough room in that area for the master cylinder and the hinge to interact together. So what I think I want to do is start removing stuff. Like I'm going to take off the AC compressor and wiring and all this plumbing, take the plenum off, the fuel injector rails, the main harness, get all that stuff out of the way. I'll put that plate on, and that's going to give me, better lifting surface here. And then the idea is I will take this back out and start working on things like the AC box and all that. So the other thing I need to look at in continuing with the interior, the transmission over there on that side is a little wider, right in that area. So you can see where I've drawn a line. I'm going to do some trimming. So there's a lot that's going to happen when I take this engine back out and try to address as many of these pieces and parts as I can before I set the engine back in. So, hey, let's get going. So to start this process, I want to get that chain off of there and just get it out of the way. Really didn't like using it, and I'm going to feel much better with it gone and moving up to that plate. So once that's out of the way, then I start pulling the foam. There's like an insulator on top of the fuel rails. Pull those off and then start pulling out the bolts that hold the intake plenum in place. Then I just blew all this out. I wanted to make sure there was no dirt or anything that could have fallen inside the engine. So I just blew around the whole thing. Then I finished taking out the rest of these bolts. You can see the rail has to move a little bit whenever you do this to get, you know, clearance around those bolts. Now the intake was sticking on pretty good. You know, it's sealed, and so I was trying to get it to break loose, and I was just taking everything loose that I could around it and getting wiring loose. And finally, I just got a little leverage. You'll see it up here in the front, and found a spot where I could put some pressure on, and it came loose. So found that there was one more wire, I think, hanging on the back. Disconnected that or unplugged it, you know, from the back of it and pulled it away. And then there's a couple wires underneath, and I decided I'll wipe down all of the openings for the intake and double check to make sure that there's nothing inside of those. So look inside all these openings with the light, and then I'm trying to fit this plate on, and I realize it's not going to work because there is a water neck up here on the front. That's for the heater hose, so that has to come off. And then on the other side is kind of a neck for the upper hose connection that goes to the water pump. So then I just mask it all off. I use duct tape, make sure I have all these openings sealed off, and follow that up with the plate, and it fit really well. So I get it in place, get all the bolts set up, get those in, and then I just snug them down with the cordless tool, the cordless DeWalt tool, and I didn't make anything tight. I wanted to do it by hand. So once I had those all down in place and I snugged them up, I felt much better about this. I did not put a ton of torque on. I just want to make sure it was solid. Now, I'm pulling these wires off, and you have to disconnect a lot of stuff. There's a lot of these little connectors and retainers that hold the wiring on. So these up front, I'm not sure what those sensors are. The rest of those are for the coil packs. So disconnect those and then just work my way around. There's 2 ground wires on this that I left on the engine that'll probably, might be used. I'm not sure just yet, but you can see it laying up there on kind of on top of the valve covers. So I get the other side loose and get the rest of the harness out of the way. I did find, I think there was a ground wire there on the front that I had to take the nut off, and then more disconnecting of these the push pins. So all these plugs, like the coil packs, they have a slide lock on them. So you have to slide the lock itself up, and then you can push the button down in, and that's what I was doing with that tool, was making those things move out of the way. So now the wiring harness is up out of the way, I move to the inside of the car, and I'm trying to get the transmission wiring off. And I guess I should have realized, I talk about it later, I didn't know that this was all one harness. A lot of times you'll see like a connector where you can separate front to rear, and in this case it's all connected, so I have to take everything off. All right, I have mounted the motor plate from Massive, and that went on very nice. I didn't realize I would have to take loose the water neck on the driver's side and what I believe was a heater hose fitting on the passenger side. So took that out of the way, it bolted right up. And then as I was removing the wires, you're tracking through these things, and I discovered that down here, it's hard to see it right now, but there's the oil filter right there. So on the back side of that is a switch, probably a sensor like a pressure switch or pressure sensor, and maybe an oil low type of indicator, I don't know, but it was damaged. So we're gonna have to replace that. When these things are pulled out, they're okay. They try to take care of what they get loose, but when I went to take the wire off, I pushed on it and the thing just came apart. So it was cracked, not a big deal. We'll just replace that. On the inside here, I didn't realize that the transmission wiring was part of the engine harness. Normally you see like a plug or separation point. I don't see any of that. And I was trying to get this out, and I realized on the transmission it has a long ear. Like it's got a round plug thing. I don't know how to label it. Cannon plug. You can probably just see the top of it right there. So it's round, and it's got a long tab sticking out. I don't know if maybe you can see that. Well, that tab has to rotate. Like the ring has to rotate counterclockwise. And currently I can't. It's hitting the crossmember piece. I thought maybe I could jack it up and move it around, and I just can't get it low enough. But that's okay. I have everything else disconnected, and I tucked the wiring harness all the way down. It's on the floor right now. So what I need to do is continue removing these items, this wiring. I don't think there's much holding that currently. I don't know if I'm going to remove the compressor just yet, but I can probably remove the plumbing. Like take the lines off and just get these out of the way so that it's not hanging out and a problem. Might just leave everything else where it is and just keeps taking stuff apart until I'm happy with it. Continuing with removal, I decided to pull the lines off of the AC compressor, and also looking at some other things there with the little red caps are on the ends of those fittings. I'll talk more about that later. So I'm taking off the AC lines. I just used a universal joint and a long extension. Got those out of the way. And here I'm taking loose, it's kind of like a bracket that's holding the wiring and it's holding the transmission lines, and I continue to work that loose underneath. The wires on the left were for the starter, and they were already disconnected. And here I'm trying to get the alternator wires off, and I ran into a problem with one of the connectors. I could not get it to release. Well, I've made some progress. The forward wiring harness, which also has the wiring for the starter, that was already disconnected at the starter anyway. So just a few things here to take it loose. However, the alternator, it's a little bit different. I can't quite see, you may have seen me struggling on a time lapse. I can't see how to take this one loose. And I don't want to force anything, so I'll pull the engine back out anyway and take a look at it then. Also, I have a load leveling engine puller. I've used this on many other vehicles that I've done, and I like these because obviously you can turn this crank and it changes your center of gravity. So this is going to help pull this engine out, and I loop the chains through the holes on the massive plate and then put it back together. So normally you have these long arms that you run a bolt through. There's two sets of these on the front and two sets on the back, and you just put them in a intake manifold bolt hole. But using this plate, and now I can hopefully make this work the way I want it. What I'm also considering trying to do, and I don't know if I'm going to do it this go around or not, because ultimately this is going to have the core support in it, and I want to lift this up and out and see just how much clearance I may or may not have, and that may dictate how I approach the build later on. Like, I know a lot of people have suggested, why not make a removable core support? And that's a possibility, but I don't know that it's absolutely necessary at this point, but it is something I will consider. So I want to get this back out, and also I mentioned earlier about the wiring. I'm going to remove the wiring off the transmission as well, but I need to get this up in the air. Let's see how this goes. Oh, you know what? Let's not do that yet. Got it part of the way. There's one. and 2. I'm going to mark something else while I'm here. I'm thinking about the bell housing bolts. I don't like to have them in an awkward position. I'm going to see if I can do something in the future, maybe to create a pocket for the bell housing bolts. They're not touching right now, but again, I kind of think down the road, like if this transmission has to come out. I don't even know if it can come out, to be honest, with the separated from the engine. I don't really know. You may have to, if it needs to come out, it may have to come out as an entire assembly. So try to plan ahead. So like right now, it's actually, that bell housing bolt is actually hitting the firewall. So this is the connector here, and I can't see the latch. It almost looks like it compresses on the ends here. There's like maybe little grippers built in, but I really feel like it's on the back side, which is kind of odd. And then the transmission, this is the kind of cam thing, but I couldn't rotate all the way. So yeah, that's easy enough. We'll see if we need that. I don't know. I hope not. Hopefully it's part of the whole Holly setup. But I'll get that other one off, and then that'll take care of removing the wiring harness. This, I looked at this a little harder. These lines here, they definitely go to the transmission, and they come across and end up there. I'm not sure what the plan is, if we're going to use those. We haven't gotten that far yet. But this, some sort of a cooling block, like these look like they connected a heater core and probably a heat exchanger type thing going on with this. So not sure yet, but I'll get this wiring off and we'll see what's next. I decided it made more sense to just remove the compressor, just get it out of the way. I'm not going to be using it anyhow. And so I took the tension off the belt and took out, I think it's 3 bolts that hold it on. Got that out of the way. And then the belt itself, it was kind of stuck on the crank pulley. So I had to just kind of work it loose. I know that I have to take the other belt off to get it off anyway. Well, I have the engine sitting on the floor. It is still under tension on the hoist. I don't have it just sitting here so it's going to remain in this location for a while. I want to talk about these a little more. So we've got these plumbing lines. There's one here, there's one there, and so there's a lot going on with this cooling system. So I have these that are capped. I have this one, and then the other one that went over here that I've removed. So apparently there's a big cooling route that this thing has, and we'll have to figure that out as to whether any of that is necessary moving forward. So maybe I can get some input on that, either on here or from other people that I know. But what I would like to address at this point is the vintage air box. And I've talked about this. The plan is this line basically is where the heater core line ends up, and I want it over here, about 2 inches difference. Also, I don't like this. This is set up for the original box that would have went in there, and this plate, while it does have a, I don't know how I want to label this, a reinforcement on the back. You can see it's kind of thick in the middle there. The intent of that is to get this over that hole, let's say, and then line up the other holes and run bolts through it. I just don't like the way it sticks out. It now has a gap all around it, and I would rather eliminate this. So what am I going to do? I'm going to make a new piece. What I have over here is the leftover from the full quarter that I bought from my Mach 1. If you remember, if you've seen the video, they had, whoever worked on it before had skinned the quarter off and put on some very generic replacement skins. And I elected to buy full quarters and trim them down, because by doing that with my car I'm able to keep the studs here for the trim clips, and also the studs up here for the Mach 1 logo. And it just makes more sense to me. But it ends up with a nice, relatively flat piece of metal that I can cut out to fill that in. So overall, I want to take care of these holes too. We don't need those anymore. So I'm going to make a whole piece here after I cut this out and fill this in by moving everything over. So, you know, always take measurements and figure out where you want things to go, and work with, you know, those sorts of ideas. Don't just start cutting and then hope for the best. Have a plan. Also, when I was pulling the engine out, I noticed this location here on the transmission bolts. These are very deep. I don't know why they make them so deep. They could have probably eliminated a good ½ inch of material there anyway. But this is kind of making contact here. And I say contact. It doesn't make contact until I'm trying to pull the engine out. If I were just putting this in and out, it wouldn't be a problem. There's actually probably an inch or more of space in this location. But again, I try to think about the idea that maybe this needs worked on someday, or it needs to come apart. So I'm really looking at the idea of making this a little bigger, this curve right here, and then, you know, building the replacement tunnel to fit that. It's not going to make much difference whether it's cut down here, cut up here, and it may eliminate like this little bump, clean it up a little more, but we'll see how that goes. Right now, this is the thing I want to work on, and then I'm going to end up putting it back up on the lift and working on removing more material down there where the original cross member was, because that's interfering with the transmission fitting. So I'm going to clean that up as well, and then we'll see how it goes from that point. I do have some ideas that I'm going to consider with the brakes. I know I talked about this. I do have a master cylinder that will fit, but I also kind of want to improve upon that. So I have ordered another assembly, actual brake pedal assembly with dual master cylinders, and that'll be coming, might be here later, it might be next week before it gets here, but I'm going to experiment with that as well and see if that'll work better than the original setup and what we're working with. So a lot to do yet. I'm going to get started on cutting that out and making a new piece. Moving on to the firewall and making modifications. All I'm doing here, I put some marks on the firewall where I held up that black panel and determined how much space I had, and then I just started drawing out lines. Essentially, I'm eliminating all of that, so it didn't really matter how big it was, as long as I had taken out the two openings on the right where the old heater coil would work, and then I need to make enough room to slide it to my left. Now, I probably could have cut it shorter now that I look at it a little harder. Like, I didn't need to make that whole plate all the way, cut the whole thing out. I could have left that portion that was beside the opening, but I'd already started on it and continued making my marks. And then I decided to just use a 4.5-inch grinder or cutter and cut this out of there. Like I said, I in hindsight, I could have left a couple inches there and just made a smaller piece, but it really doesn't matter. It's the same process. I still would have had to cut this out, but it's just something to think about whenever you're doing these things. How can you change or make improvements? And that's kind of how I look at things. Even when I'm doing it, I realize, hey, maybe I could have done this or could have done that. So I'm just pointing that out at this time. So I go inside and I cut what I can from where I couldn't get the grinder on the outside. I went inside and cut that piece loose, and then once I had that out of the way, I just took the sanding disc on the other grinder and just broke the edges. You don't want any sharp burrs or anything to catch your hand on. Now, this piece of sheet metal here, as I mentioned, is a quarter panel from the '69 Mustang, and I'll note this later. When I set that piece on there, I did that because I set it on there because the little flange on the backside wouldn't allow it to lay flat. And so when I cut this loose, I had indicated how I laid that on. So I usually put an arrow, and I put like the letter I for inside. And when I cut this, I felt like it would work just the way it was. But later on, I realized that that panel has a subtle curve to it, and so does the firewall. Now, when I'm doing stuff like this, a lot of times you have trouble holding on to that. So I point there that I put two metal screws into the openings where I had already planned to make, cut out the big opening. So I use those screws as a handle, and either I'll do something like that or I'll weld on a piece of metal. And that way you don't drop that piece of metal inside of something else. So if you're doing another kind of repair, you need something to hang on to. Like if you were putting a plug in a fender, you don't want that thing to fall inside when you're working on it. So always have some sort of screw or handle welded to it. I'm liking that a lot better. So initially, whenever I traced it out, you'll see that I had an eye here that was for inside, and the arrow was actually pointing up. But whenever I put it in place, I realized this isn't actually flat. It has a very subtle curve. And that actually worked well with the panel because it had a subtle curve. So I flipped it over and I trimmed it down, and now everything is really close. Nice thing is I can go through the opening that I made in the tunnel to put clamps on it. Also, I had attached these screws. I probably mentioned it in the voiceover that I did. This gives you something to hang on to whenever you're working on something. A lot of times I'll weld a piece of metal somewhere and just hold on to it so that I can fit it in here, because otherwise it could fall through pretty easily when it fits right. So now I'm going to take my time and weld that in, and then I can take the plate up here that's for the vintage air, and you can see I've already marked 4 of the holes just to get a reference, and then I'll put it over and make basically that plate fit this. So that's going to clean that up, look pretty nice, and then I'll look at doing more with this later, but that'll address at least one issue. Now comes the fun part. As you can see, I'm using a screwdriver here, and what I'm doing is pushing the mating flanges together. I want to make it as flush as I can. I'm also using 30 thousandths wire, as I've been using probably more often than anything else at this point, and I'm using the Yes Welder DP 200. So this welder does a great job. I don't have any complaints about it at all. I continue to work my way around, and you can see the gap going away when I push that up against. And I just want to keep making sure that I'm consistent all the way around. I don't want to do a long weld. I want to keep doing tacks. And sometimes whenever you're doing this, even though I'm able to push from the outside, sometimes you may have to go from the inside. I'm going to show that in just a minute. I end up using a real long 3/8 extension because I needed to push out at one location. But I just go around the perimeter and get the tack welds in place, and then I go in between those tack welds and just start filling things in. Again, I'm not in a rush. I'm not trying to weld a great long length of metal. And here's what I was talking about. This piece here, I hammer it a little bit to help smooth things out, and then I use that long extension so I can press against it, and I'm using the hammer just to kind of flatten out that little mating flange. And sometimes you might have to hit it a couple times, you know. Not everything fits as perfect as we want it to. So I continue doing the tacks and use the hammer there just to smooth things up a little more and work my way all around it once again. Take your time. Don't get in a hurry. Let it cool off between sessions and just keep spreading the welds. So magic appears, and there it is. It's all welded back together. I get out the sanding disc and start knocking it down. And this, I know it's not exciting. This is like boring stuff, but it's part of the process. You want to make sure the welds are about as flush as you can get them. Later on, I may end up using, some body filler, of course, and smooth this up. And most of that will be behind that plate anyway. The plate's going to kind of cover some of that. So I just continue knocking down the welds, and then once I get done with the big grinder, I eventually break out the little 90 grinder and just kind of work my way a lot tighter on those welds and get those smoothed up and get all that looking good. So once I am satisfied with those welds, then I moved on to the little belt sander because I couldn't get in quite the way I wanted on that inside edge. Now, the inside of this has that plate on that little round plate inside. So I'm using a measuring cup here, and it was bigger than the plate, and I just drew a circle around it. And then I ended up drawing a second circle inside of that. I wanted the dimension to be between the diameter of those two circles. I have everything welded, and I'm pretty happy with how this looks. Now, obviously, I need to make a hole here, make a larger hole. And I'll point out that the original hole had this kind of like flat side to it. And so whenever they made this piece, it also had that flat side to it. And that's just because they were copying the factory design. It really doesn't matter at this point. Just make a hole. And you saw in my time lapse, I basically found a cup that would fit roughly this diameter of this plate, and then try to replicate that as close as I could. And then I went back and I didn't see it, I turned the cup around and I traced a secondary hole within that perimeter. Because this dimension here, I don't have an exact dimension. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It didn't fit perfectly to begin with. It's got play in it anyway. Now, after doing that and tracing where I expect everything to end up, what I want to do is make a new hole. And there's a couple ways you can do this. A lot of times what I end up doing is I take a drill and I'll actually drill all the way around. I'll make holes using a small drill bit and just make a complete circle. And that way I can just cut through the little overlaps or the joints of where the two holes kind of meet together, and then work that out with a rotary file or a burr, as I call it. That's what the tool you've seen me use before. It's kind of like goes on the end of a straight grinder, and then you can just cut away the excess material. But I'm going to do something different. I bought this tool here a long time ago at the SEMA show, and basically what this does is allows you to nibble out the hole. And you put your drill on one side, and then it has this cutter on the other end. So it changes this rotation to this rotation, or this action. So I'll drill a pilot hole and then come back and try to nibble out what I need to with this. This will pivot around. You can see that. And you should be able to basically take the drill sideways and go around like this and nibble that hole out. So let me get started with that, and we'll see how it turns out. So you just put this on the end of your drill, and that makes that action. Then you got to figure out the exact angle you want to come in at. I'm trying not to go too fast, because if you go too fast, you could cut too much. So I'm trying to just be gentle and go slow with it. Voila! Pretty nice hole. You know, I'll come back and clean up the edges, but that little tool really makes a big difference. Just see how close I got here. So a little more trimming, and that's going to fit right in. Let's go to part 2. And forgive me if I can't block out the noise from my neighbor who is trimming trees in their front yard. But this is the tool that I was talking about, rotary file. This gets used a lot in the aircraft industry on the end of a straight grinder. And then also a drum sander that is on a 90-degree grinder. So enjoy the sounds of the chainsaw while I get ready to do this. What I need to do now is verify that the alignment is what I want. And so I've already checked this. I've got all of the holes marked that are going to relate to this. And they're right on where I want them. So I'll take a center punch and mark these. The holes that were in the original firewall piece were pretty big, and as a comparison, these are a bit smaller. So I can still make them that big, it's not going to matter. What I usually do is take a step drill, figure out which one I need to use, about halfway in, and step these up. That feels pretty good. I know these two I have a little bigger, so I'm going to step these up to the same size. I'll do some more blending on the back side. I want to grind down any weld that's worked its way through. Of course, smooth that up, smooth these holes up, and then I can refit the air box and see how it's going to look. So I took the 2-inch sanding disc, just knocked down the weld. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. You know, there's room back there. It's not going to be, the box won't be tight up against it anyway. But I'm going to knock all that down, and then I fit the air box in place and just use this block of wood to hold it up in there. Now it's going to be a lot easier to do in the future, you know, with two people. I run into some problems here trying to get this to fit and get the bolts to line up. You know, it's just everything has to be in the right spot. So you'll see here, I'm going to point out with an arrow, I end up putting they give you these little studs that you can put in, and I put one into the plate and then worked it through the hole right there. And that's the idea, is you can put those on there. There's two of them, and it has an Allen wrench head in it, so you can put those in place and, you know, get things to line up, and it makes it easier if you're trying to do it by yourself. So get the bolts in place. I had one problem with the one little bottom bolt on the outside there. I couldn't get the bolt to start quite right, and I had to open up the hole just a little bit, but it went fine after that, so no complaints. All right, the box is in place, and it took a little effort. You know, they give you these pins, the threaded, like piece of all thread that you can put in to the nut that's on the plate, and then you feed it through this hole. This will be a lot easier with two people. But I managed to get it in there, and I had a little trouble with that bolt because there was a little bit of metal in the hole that was fighting it. So I cleaned that up with the rotary file, and now the bolts all fit. And I made a mistake here, which will be easy to fix. Apparently this was not intended to be this size. So this was a like a self-tapping lag bolt type of thing. I've been looking at it, and I'm sure, you know, they built this plate specifically to cover up that flange, that removable piece that was right here, if it was on an AC car. So when you look at this piece here, you see this is a removable plate. So if it had factory AC, you would have had some hardware coming out through that opening. And I know the intent was to cover that up. And I'm looking at this a little more. I'm not saying I'm going to, and I'm going to consider just cutting this off right here. Make a square plate, because there's nothing behind this. And I think it might look a little better if I get rid of that. And if not, I'll have to weld that hole shut and then put that little lag screw in there. On the inside, I did have a couple problems. One of them was right here, and this was just kind of hitting this bracket, and I trimmed this plate out a little to give it some clearance. Also, I'll point out, whenever I was fitting this in place, that popped loose, and I'm not sure what that holds, if it's just for wiring or something like that, but I can tack weld that back on. But I was kind of struggling a little with that. And then this plate, the angle was a little shallow, let's say. So I ended up putting it in a vise, and right here on this crease, I bent it further forward so that it made good contact here. When it was out of the package, let's say, and I attached it, that was fine. But when I tried to push it forward, it was flexing the body on this side, and I didn't like that. Now, would it have made any difference if it was over 2 inches? I don't think so. I think it still would have been kind of fighting that. So I bent that, got that in place, and then one more thing, this control module underneath here. So this is designed to be 2 inches over here, and what I ended up having was this was making some contact with the bottom of the cowl, and I just bumped it up. It's not going to matter. I just took a hammer and kind of just, it looks nice, but I bumped it up so the transition is still there. But I didn't want to cut this open and try to weld something in and make a mess of things. So just bumped it up, and that gave clearance for that module. And then I did find this bracket right here. There's two kind of like little, I guess, servo motors or something here on top. And I didn't notice it when I had this over this direction, but this one was actually making contact with the bottom of this plate. So I have it identified the trim, and I put some marks on it. It's really just barely even touching. I probably don't even need to do anything, but I don't like to have stuff touching. So I may trim this one off in particular, where this one is. There's just a little corner, kind of hard to see it, up there that's just could go away. At this point, I feel good about this box. I feel like I can take it out now and move on to the next issue that I'm having. And I'm still debating on whether I'm going to cut this open bigger or not. I haven't decided yet. But I want to get it up on the lift and start trimming out excess material that's in the crossmember, and try to give a little more room on the side of the transmission. I also want to say that I have found out that I have a friend who works for a sheet metal company, and he told me that he can make me a tranny tunnel. So once I get this all cut out the way I want it and figure out what I want, you know, here and there, what I can leave behind, then I will get with him and see if we can't come up with a replacement tunnel similar to what was in here. You know, I had to cut this area back up here, and I have those pieces bent up, and I'm really just considering whether I need to go any higher. Odds are, if this thing's going to come apart ever again, it'll come out engine and transmission all together. So I don't know. I don't think I really want to go any higher on that opening on the tunnel, because you can see what I'm getting into is the vent system and how that would be above the bottom of that ductwork there. So I think I'll probably just leave that alone. But I have some other stuff that I'm going to be dealing with moving forward, and I'll talk about that in later videos. But I want to get this up on the lift and see if I can't start cutting away some of that other stuff. Up on the lift it goes. Iron Man likes to go for these rides, makes him feel kind of important. Now, I'm going to work on cutting loose what's left of these the crossmember piece. And you can see that big ugly weld in there. That's from dynacorn. You know, they just filled in that gap with weld. But I wish I could have removed this sooner, or I wish I would have realized I could have removed this sooner, because I had to modify the channel pieces for, like, the frame connector piece for the TCI suspension. And had this not been there, I wouldn't have had to do that. So I don't even know if this was in the exact right spot. It could have been that it's off a little bit. I don't know. But I'm just going to eliminate it because it doesn't make any difference. It's not really adding any strength at all, especially since it's not connected at the top. And I'll point out there, you got to wear a face mask and hearing protection and leather gloves when you're doing this kind of work. Now, I'm sanding it down but I may end up removing the rest of those pieces later, but I'm just trying to get stuff out of the way at the moment. It's not a priority to have this perfectly smooth. There are spot welds there that I could probably drill and eliminate this pretty easily, but this is all I'm doing for now. Well, that's going to be the end of this video. Now, I'm trying to show you as much information as I can as I'm doing it. I'm learning this as well. I haven't done one of these before, and I'm getting a lot of advice from other people. And there's a variety of ways you can do this. Like, you could go multiple directions with the air conditioning. You could go multiple directions with the brake and the brake caliper and all that sort of thing. I'm trying to do what I feel is right and what the owner wants me to do, and so that's the path that I'm on. I'm also trying to alleviate some of these other problems that will be upcoming. There'll be more details on all that in the future, but there are things that you don't realize whenever you're trying to do one of these conversions. So the engine is a big engine, and there are also variables between whether it's out of a Mustang or out of a truck. You know, these things come into play. Stuff like the gas pedal, it's fly-by-wire, and I'm getting there. I'm getting these things figured out, and you're going to find out too as we go through this. So I encourage you to keep watching these videos and stay tuned. But I also encourage you to leave a comment and a thumbs up. You know, my patrons support me. They help me make these videos and keep this stuff going. And in order for me to get likes and stuff on YouTube that help encourage the YouTube algorithm, I need you to be part of that. So leave a comment and a thumbs up, and follow any links that I may have. I'll put some in the description box down below, whether it's for Patreon or Amazon or any products that I've used that I endorse. You can find them down below as well. But otherwise, that'll be it for this video. So until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya. Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage, where I am continuing to work on the 68 Mustang Fastback build known as Fangled. I should also maybe say Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. I am continuing. Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. I am continuing to work on the 68 Mustang Fastback build known as Fangled. Now, when I left off in the last video, I was talking about the master cylinder that were purchased for this project that I really like. Let's take a look at what's going on. I don't like that at all. I don't like that one.